Good evening, everyone. My name is Nakshatra. I am the lead character artist at Little Red Zombies. Today, I'm here. Last year, I was here actually giving a talk on character creation and its process, how a character is made from scratch and ends up being in a game where guys like you and me can play it. Now, this time around, I decided to go a little in-depth. A character can be many things. A character can be an anatomy, clothing, organic, inorganics, hard surface, and then there is the complex head, and then comes the hair. Now, the reason why I took hair at the last is not just because that's what the talk is going to be about, but the information available on hairs or how you approach hair, what pipeline should you choose, how to approach it, the information on it is pretty limited out there. And even if there is, you need to dig deep and find ways to apply it. So this time around, I decided to let's shed some light on this topic and give you an idea, because it's not as complex as it sounds. It's just that the information is not easily available out there. So before jumping right in, I would like to give you a little short intro about the studio that I work for. That's Little Red Zombies. You can find us on ArtStation. We keep posting personal, professional works out there, so you can keep following us there. And now let's get on the real-time hair. Now, this guy, I don't think it needs any introduction. This is Tom Cruise from The Last Samurai. This was a fan art that we chose to do. At Little Red Zombies, we decided to let's pick a topic for setting a benchmark for creating real-time hairs. Now, this real-time hairs, I keep saying real-time hairs. What is this real-time hairs? So let me ask you one thing just to start off with. How many of you here are students? Okay, and how many of you are professional artists? Okay, so for those of you, the real time means something that's going on live. There are two basic variations. There's one is cinematic hairs, which is pre-rendered hair, and then there is the real time hair, which goes into video games. I'll be talking about the real time hairs only today. So this, like I said, is a fan art of Tom Cruise. This was a collaboration between me and one of the other artists named Sriram Chandra. He was involved in creating the awesome head of Tom Cruise, and I was responsible for creating the hair and the outfit for this guy. So the main idea behind doing this is to set a benchmark for creating hairs. Now, you can't just set a benchmark like let's start creating hairs and set a benchmark. No, you have to go through certain stages. You need to know how some things work, what doesn't work, and you have to evolve over the time. And we did that part, and we started our journey back in 2015, where we started working on the first professional asset for Sniper Ghost Warrior 3. And we started our journey creating the hand-painted textures. There are like lots of ways of doing hairs, and we started learning like what's the best way of doing it, what are different approaches we can take based on time, based on efficiency, and a lot of other things. So as year passed, we started to figure out, okay, some things are working, some things are not working. Towards 2016 to 17, some things, a lot of changes came about. We were introduced to XGen, how we can apply XGen to our process and make things faster. This is just a generic flow that I'm talking about, going in depth about it, but this is just an overall feeling and how we progressed over the while. And 2017 to 18, the present day, we've come across to a very refined state of the pipeline that we can share with you guys, where it's much more approachable. Earlier on, it wasn't that as well refined as it is today. So the agenda for today is showcasing our pipeline. That's the major thing. It starts with collecting references, breaking down those references, creating the textures, usage of XGen, what this XGen is, how we use it, placement, and finally the engine integration. Now, these stages, what I've learned is the hair is like a complicated thing. It doesn't really have a proper structure or thing to it. So if you find it a little complicated to understand, if you guys have any questions, I'll be stopping by every stages for you guys. So if you have any questions, I'm not sure if you can do this or not, but if you have any questions, you can either keep it towards the end, or it's also fine if you just stop by at every stage, and I'll ask you around, like if you have any questions, you can fire them at me. I'll be more than happy to help you out. So, starting with the reference. So for this case, we chose Tom Cruise. Now, this is something we are a fan of at the Little Zombies. Me and Shriram both are a fan of Tom Cruise, and who isn't, right? So we picked this guy. We decided to use his hairstyle, long hairs, and it looks cool. And also he has this nice Japanese armor to go with. So it's a nice combination, right? So we picked this guy. Now, after you get a reference, this is the primary concept, right? You need to create a mood board for that. A mood board is, a reference pack is basically a package of a lot of angles, basically. You can see, feel the character in different emotions, different stages, different period, daytime, nighttime, how the lights reflect, a lot of things. And you get to learn a lot from collecting a good reference pack. So once we have a nice reference pack done, we can get into breaking it down. For those of you who are trying to figure out like how much time does this take, it's usually around a day or two. It depends. Like right now, it was easier for me to find references of this guy because, come on, he's a movie star, right? You can have millions of photos out there on the Google. Plus, I just downloaded a 1080p movie of this and just kept snapping all the screenshots that I thought would help me out. So if you're looking for professional assets, it's pretty much the same thing. The professional asset usually has one or two angles to it, and you just scout out on the internet and just find whichever angle pleases your original concept. So breaking down the reference pack. Now, like I said, like other categories in creating 3D where there is anatomy, clothing, you can structure things. In anatomy, you have muscles, you have bones, you have names for that, and it's easy to classify them based on that. If you look at a hair, hair is not something that can be easily classified. What is it? What's a hair? It's basically clumps, right? It's a clump of strands. And how do you define it? How do you categorize it? So we need to classify them based on certain things. Now, the way I do that is creating some patterns. Our human eye has a tendency of finding the patterns. If you spot something that's repeating itself, we do have a tendency to make them group, group them away. So in the same sense, you can see certain lines that I've drawn based on color that help me understand certain hairs are longer. There is a part line going on. And there are the back fillers, top fillers, and I just categorize them just to help me out understand, okay, now these hairs are not just some clumpy mess, but categories of certain things, certain areas. In a similar sense, I applied that same philosophy to the Tom Cruise's hair. You can see on the right, I'm not sure if you can see them, but there are certain lines out there which represent the colors where the beard is showing up, certain specific lines that I feel that this is very unique to this character. So having that laid down helps me understand where I need to pay attention to, right? If I know what I'm doing, it's much more easier to approach it. So I hope it was pretty explanatory. I don't think anyone has questions on that. But moving on to the next stage is the sculpt pass. The end result of hair comes through real time. It's a long process which involves placement of alpha cards, creating textures, and this process takes time. To see what you're aiming for, to see what this hair is going to look like, it takes an amount of time, right? There is lots of direction to it, there is lots of feedback for that, and to get to that point, it takes time. So we at Little Zombies believe that let's build up something which will give us an instantaneous result where the art director or the previewers can easily get an idea or a glimpse of what we are achieving for, what are we aiming for, how the forms are going to read, how the silhouette is going to read. Again, coming back to the basic points of forms, silhouettes, proportions, and all these things. So a sculpt pass helps me get those forms within a couple of days. It doesn't take much time, and it's fun. Honestly, it's very fun to create all these strands and just make it look as cool and as close as to the concept is. So this was done in the Zbrush. I used the Zbrush for creating the strands, creating curve tubes, using the move brush, standard, smoothing, inflating, and you just try to get that forms and feels like you see in the concept. Of course, there's a reference pack for you to understand how it looks in all the angles. Like I said, the pros for this would be is a quick process. It doesn't take much time compared to the end result. You get an overall understanding of how the character is going to read, whether those flyaways. This guy may look really great in that angle. The cinematic team, the films are made for specific angles. They make sure that the actor is looking amazing from certain angles, but it need not be correct from all the angles. He may not look cool from the other angles, right? So we have to make sure that there is this balance, so you get an understanding of how things are going to read from everywhere. Plus, there's a mental preparation. You need to know what are you getting into, how things are going to turn out, where the forms are going to change, how the clumping is going to happen, how the spreads, all these things. The mental preparation that you need to know before you jump right in, it really helps you get relaxed because you sorted plenty of things out in this stage itself. It just helps you a lot more. And finally, the review, which is the most important thing, where if it's your personal thing, it's fine, but when you are working on a professional asset where it goes to certain art direction, there are reviewers for that, it's easier for them to understand that what direction you're heading into. if they're not happy with the result, if they have certain different direction than what you're aiming for, it just gives them a better idea to, oh, this can be changed in this way. So it again helps to minimize the errors that you may do in the later stage. To understand the textures, how we're going to do that is we're going to get back to the reference pack. We're going to look back at the broken down image that we did for the Tom Cruise, and we're going to create a very quick hand-painted guide. For those of you, just to give an idea, how the real-time hairs work is we create certain alpha cards. These cards are planes, they're polygons, and we paint some textures on them. We add some textures on them. Let's say we add them, not paint. We add textures on them. White and black are the two primary colors we use for creating opacity maps. Opacity maps basically tells us what is going to be seen and what is not. So imagine that these red things is where the opacity is going to be pure white, where the engine will render it completely opaque. That is, you can see that anything within this black thing is something that you will not be able to see. This is, imagine like there are rectangular cards here. I'll get back to that afterwards as well. But texture planning is basically to eliminate possibilities of extra planes, extra strands, or extra clumps that you might create in the future. So it just helps me understand. What I've done is basically taken all the information that I had broken down and tried to mimic those in a very simple way, where I'm trying to understand how these hairs are looking when they're flat out. It just helps me understand what kind of categories, what kind of places these things are going to head into. You'll get to know what I'm getting at right now. So once these hand-painted guides are done, this is done in the Photoshop. It usually takes me around a day or two max. And once this is sorted, we head on to the XGen. Now, XGen, what is this? How many of you have heard what XGen is? Cool. So XGen is basically a plugin kind of thing, which is in the Maya. It helps you create hairs, hair, fur, whatever. So what XGen does is more towards the cinematic side. We use it for cinematics primarily. But what we've started to realize is, rather than painting, previously what we used to do, we used to paint these textures, and this used to take a lot of time. This used to take a lot of time, plus it used to differentiate from artist to artist. Not everyone is equally skilled when creating hand-painted textures, right? So XGen, what it does is an automated process. You just need to add in some numbers to it. You need to give a certain shape, and it will give you a very generic, consistent result to what you're trying to get into. I'll just show you what I mean. So first, like I said, it's simple to use. It's basically few tools that you need to know inside of it. Once you know that, it's all sorted. It's consistent. Like I said, every artist will get certain similar results, right? And that's very important when you're talking professional. If you have like 100 hairs going on into the games, and every artist is doing some little different on its own, everyone has their own style, right? We don't want that when it's a same universe. When it's the same game, you don't want to have that. So it gives us a consistent result, and it's fast. It's definitely fast. So let me show you what exactly I mean. So while setting it up, we look at the concept. So I'll tell you what that concept did. So if you're saying like, if you're going to do XGen, then why did we paint it? What happens is, XGen is fast. However, while creating XGen, you need to know where you're heading into. You need to put in some shapes there. You need to put in some numbers there. But what shape are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to get into? Hand painting guide is what exactly helped us in knowing like, this is the kind of shape that I'm trying to achieve. So we go into the Maya, we create a plane. As you can see, I've given a slight tilt to it. I'll just tell you why that is. We add in some guides, and this is where the XGen has already started. I have converted that plane for an XGen usage. I've added certain guides, like just few of them, and given it certain shape. There is a move brush in there, just gave it some shape that looks kind of promising as the concept is. The default hairs, this is just a guide. We dial up some numbers there in it, and the computer starts adding the hairs. So it's like few hundred hairs over there. Once the shape is done, after a few tweaked modifiers that we apply, it may be either adding clumps to it, adding noise, or sways and cuts. Lots of tweaks later, this is how it looks, and the final render is on the right side. So this is what our concept was, and that is what the XGen gave me. This is not something that can go in the game. It's not defined that well. This took me like, how much? Like an hour or something, just maybe for one strand, the whole package. And that took me a couple of minutes, and the result you can see is far more better. it's much more controlled. And I can change it on the fly. Let's say if you talk about the Photoshop thing, the one that I painted, it's hard to change it. I just cannot go back there and, like, let's say if the art director tells me, let's have it a little more swaying away or make it more clumped. Now, that's going to be a bit more work on my side where I have to erase it. The layering will affect. All these things are, oh my, it's a mess. Unless you are a person who is like, on the first go, I'm going to get it done, which doesn't happen in the artists. You have to always go back and forth with the work that you're doing to try to get the results that you're looking for. And XGen helps me getting the back and forth part easily. So the right side is what the result is, and that's what we get. And yeah, the slanting, the tilt of the plane is for the reason that when you render it, on the right side you can see there is a nice fall off to it. So when we are placing those planes on the head, there is a nice fall off, just like how we have on the hairs. Okay, and that was just one plane. This is just an example of one plane. How we arrange the whole set is something that we see in the arrangement, where all of these are those same guides. I've just hidden the hairs. These are the guides. Once I activate the hairs, it will start growing the hairs over there. I'm just making it more simplified for you to understand. And it helps us to even control it, change the shape of it, and it's just much more easier and manageable because this is graphic intensive. Having the hair run in real time, it is a bit processor intensive and graphic intensive. So they are aligned in a certain sequence that I remember for myself. And you can even see there are roots and tips that are going all the way. So all these things just help us to keep everything in check, keep everything arranged and in sequence, so that, come on, we have to understand that we are going back and forth with this. So I need to know where lies what. So this is the sort of arrangement we go for. Another thing that XGen helps us, or Maya, both of them help us in, is creating the maps. When you're making textures which are hand painted, most of the time you end up creating just one texture, maybe an alpha with it. But in today's generation, when we are working with the Unreal Engine and so many engines out there, we need a couple of maps. The shaders are getting so sophisticated these days that every single thing needs its own map. That is for our own good. We are getting amazing results with that. But creating that with the hand paint is slightly difficult. So XGen also helps us in creating, Maya actually, with the help of the Arnold render, it helps us creating certain maps. These are some of the maps that went into the Tom Cruise. All these examples that you're seeing is all related to Tom Cruise. We're just looking at him as an example here. And since we are going into the Unreal Engine, the render that you saw in the first slide is something that was taken in the Unreal Engine without any After Effects. It's completely pure Unreal Engine. So these are all the maps that went in. Let's just look at them quickly, one by one. The first one that we see is the flat render. It has certain IDs. Very few of these strands have their own IDs then, so that it can be broken into subtle, slight hue changes, variation changes, and so forth. The next is the AO, in Wind Occlusion, which gives the depth and the height. The spec map is something that generates from the lighting. We add certain lights, directional lights, omni lights or stuff, and it gives a nice breakage where you start seeing certain whites and darks in a much more saturated way. It just helps us to create that nice breakage to it. The next image is the color. That's the combination of all these maps, the flat, the AO, and the spec. When you combine all these maps, this is the kind of result that we achieve for. So you have these nice breakages in colors, you have depth, you also have a nice alphas to it. Next one is the alpha, the opacity map, like I told. Imagine that these rectangular things, the columns they are in, these are what the cards are going to be like. The white portion is something that will be visible, the black is something that will be transparent. Unique ID map is something very specific to Unreal Engine. What it does is, this map is a grayscale map. Every single strand that you see has its own gray value, right? What this does is, it tells Engine to render every single strand in a unique way. It gives a little extra attention to all these strands. It just helps us separate these hairs, which would rather look much more singular. This will just help to give that nice realistic breakage to it. Next one is the root map, which is a gradient from top to bottom, where the whites are the tips and the darks are the roots. The last one is the normal map. As everyone knows, normal map is something that just gives another bump to it, like how the hairs have the feeling of having the layers, the underlying hairs, the overlaying hairs. It just nicely breaks up when you put lights, some nice gloss to it. It just helps to read hairs much better. So all these maps are what went into the game. Let me just clear this fact that the color map is something that's generated from all these three maps. So these three maps don't work individually, they work together in the engine. So everything from the color map just goes directly into the engine. We plug it in, and I'll show it to you in the end how they all work. A part of this production is kind of done, like we are halfway through. The halfway through started from getting the concept, creating the reference pack, breaking it down, creating a sculpt pass to get an overall understanding, then creating textures in the XGen. Now, all these steps are the halfway through. The last step, which is the plane construction, placement and all, that itself is a halfway more to go. So, real time. Things need to be very efficient when you talk real time. We cannot go overboard. Now, in real time, there are certain limitations, like you all know. We all play games, and we know that not everything is million polygons and 100,000 triangles and all that stuff. We need to be very, very careful how we place them. NPCs, playable characters, characters which are far away from us, everyone have their own importance. Now, how you manage these things is important. And when you're talking professional, we need to state these things right from the get-go. It is not suggested. There is an optimization pass which happens, but we at Little Red Zombies believe that if you are clever-minded right from the get-go, there is a lot of time and a lot of quality that you can help save, which would rather, wouldn't want to mess with at the later stage. So talking about the plane construction, we need to consider poly count, what kind of poly count budget we are looking for. For this character, the quality was the benchmark. We weren't trying to achieve a poly count per se, but something around 20K, 25K was the idea. And in today's generation, the games that you see is something that supports around 20, 25K and so on forth. Again, it depends on project to project. You cannot quote me on that, but that's the kind of average we are going for. Right? Like I said, optimizing right from the beginning, so we don't have to hustle around. So what happens is this part of optimization. Many studios have this pipeline where there is optimization pass, which is perfectly fine, and I don't mind it, and it's good. But what if we do that? What happens is, if you optimize in the end, you get a good quality at the beginning. And towards the end of the time when you are trying to optimize, you lose that quality. There's something that you're failing. There's something that is lacking. It happens over time. But if you aim to optimize right from the beginning, the quality is something that will never be going down. You'll always keep pushing for that. So optimizing from the beginning helps, and starting low, add as you go, is exactly same to the polygon, where if you believe that something is looking jagged, something is looking faceting, something is looking low quality, keep it like that. Not everything needs to be high density, not everything needs to look smooth and curvy. You can add it as you go and as you feel like. Don't believe what you see at the present, imagine the whole picture. The end result is what's going to matter. So we have the plane construction. So let's take a very small example. This is the example I keep training to my guys. Like, this is something you have to keep in mind. This is just one example that I choose to show, and it's pretty understandable. Let's imagine a plane. This is the alpha card. This is where the textures are going to be applied. The white is going to be seen, and the darks are something that's going to be transparent. So this is the plane that we're going to put it on. Imagine that black thing is the texture, right? This is just texture. Don't imagine this is an opacity. I'm just trying to, because of the contrast, I'm just showing that this is the texture. Every polygon is made up of two triangles. I'm not going into some geometry and algebra over here, but I'm just trying to explain that every polygon here is made up of two triangles, right? At the top, there are two triangles. What I believe is, it's not really optimist, like the space is getting wasted up there. So what I did is, I collapsed one edge at the top. I haven't started placement yet. This is just still planning before that. So I collapsed from two triangles to one triangle. What you're seeing here is something that we call volume placement. Volume placement is something where you intersect planes. What happens is, if you're looking at this plane from this angle, it's looking perfectly fine. You can see the hairs which are looking completely okay. But if you shift this, if you turn this, if you're looking from the other angle, you'll start seeing something that's slashed off. And that looks really bad. You easily spot. If you're watching a cinematic, if I'm looking at the Uncharted game, I'm sure everyone has played that. So if you're watching the Uncharted game, if I'm seeing Nathan Drake's hair from one angle and I'm seeing these lines, I'm losing the idea of, I'm not falling in, I'm not with the story now, I'm looking at that hair, why is it looking so bad? So creating this volume, what it helps is, it intersects the plane, and from every angle you'll be able to see the hair, the volume, and nothing will be looking as fine as it shouldn't. So doing that, what happens is I'm saving 2 triangles. Let's get back to the planning thing. It saves 2 triangles. For the Tom Cruise's example, let's see what happened. These 2 triangles were saved around these clumps. We actually have a count on this. I actually did this. I actually counted around 1,300 planes out there, which every one of them had these triangles at the top. Now, that saved me around 2,600 triangles right from the get-go. I didn't do anything. No optimization pass was involved in this whatsoever. Right from the get-go, I decided to choose 1 triangle to be gone, and I just saved 2,600. The NPCs that I've worked with are usually around 5,000 triangles. Some are 10,000. And if I'm saving 2,600 triangles, man, that's a day's worth of work that I saved for myself. And it's a hustle. Imagine me going in those hairs and finding those unnecessary polygons and deleting them off. That's a nightmare for me. So just having this mentality from the get-go will save a lot of things. There are many things like this that we keep in mind. Let's look at an example that Tom Cruise had. So wherever I could find, this is the actual sheet that went in for the Tom Cruise. Every single one of them has it somewhere or the other, even at the roots if possible. So that was really helpful, and it just makes things a lot faster. Come on, we're using graphics card. Even if you're using a 1080, it's still hard for the engine to render these things, right? And we want to have efficiency here. That's really important. 60 FPS is what we look at for today. So this definitely helps that. So we have the planning done. Everything is done. Now it's time to place it. And all the thanks goes to Zbrush, the software that I only Zbrush is what I use throughout the whole placement thing. Many of you will, who know how Zbrush works, might find it difficult to understand how is Zbrush coming into this, how is it coming into the play while you're placing the planes. Usually you see that doing in Max or Maya. Why Zbrush? So there are 4 key things that I find very interesting that only Zbrush has offered me in a smoothest possible way, and that starts with the transpose line. Nowadays, how many of you are using Zbrush here? Can you just raise your hands? You're using it, right? So nowadays you got this pivot thing where the transpose line has this option of using a pivot gizmo thing, I think. I'm not really using that, but the transpose line, what it does is, it gives me an ability to create pivots on the fly. I can have it made at the roots, I can have it made at the midpoint, at the tip, anywhere that I want, at any angle that I want. It also gives me ability to stretch it, distort it, skew it, anyhow and any way that is possible, and that really helps me a lot for creating the variations that we're looking for. Next is the brushes. Not too many brushes, just move brushes, just the variety of it. There is a move topology, there is move regular, and then there is move elastic. Also, there's a snake hook brush which gives me an ability to make bigger changes, like a very huge amount of shifts is something that snake hook allows me. So limited brushes. The masking and the isolations are something that help me make things more controlled. I want to work in certain specific area, mask it out. I want to work in certain areas that I don't want to, just isolate it. It's up to you. So having these 4 features is something that's unbeatable for me when coming to placement of the hairs. Now, many of the artists that I have trained believe that how is it something that you place things in such a short span of time? We have to agree that this placement and thing in professional life, you need to have certain deadlines to it. Not everything is just laid back. Yes, hairs are complicated. That doesn't give you an authority to just like take your time to do it, right? It's just you need to do it very structurally. So creating the guides, getting back to the reference pack that we did, we create certain clumps. The clump palette that we create is based on the reference pack that we had collected, the breakdown that we did. We use that as an example and we create certain palettes. Palettes are exactly like how colors are. You create certain palettes and we pick from them and we start placing them. It just makes, again, work a little faster. Layering is something that, again, is important in hairs. We choose to create layers rather than having a base cap. Traditionally, what you must have seen a lot is people used to create a cap which you paint a texture, which takes unnecessary amount of texture resolution and which is not seen. Maybe 80% of it is not seen, just 15% of the scene. So why waste that? So rather than creating a cap, we use those cards which are at a very low density and we start placing them. So that's the first layer. We add on the second layer. The layering happens based on the textures that we did. So just to give a very quick understanding, let's go back to the example. So the thicker versions are something that are used for the base. As you move ahead, as you keep going outside on the outer layer, we start using the thinner versions and we create variations that we created in the clumps. So that's the second and third layer. And finally, the fly-offs, the cool-looking fly-offs that we see in the realistic hair that shine when you put a rim light on it, right? And then there is the final adjustments, which again happen in Zbrush. I'm not leaving the Zbrush throughout the whole placement stage. You can see that this is something that stacks up. Now again, like I said, hair is not something that we sculpt and you start seeing things. No, it comes towards the end. Everything starts adding up after a couple of days. Once you spend enough time, things will start coming together. Then you realize, okay, we need to change certain shapes, certain forms, just to match it to the concept, to the actual Tom Cruise that we are achieving. After the final adjustments are done, it's time to set up the mesh. Like I said, this was taken in the Unreal Engine, so we need to make certain preparations. Preparations like how we create the material IDs, hairs, beard, and the eyebrows. Though they all had same textures to them, we decided to change them because the shaders, the way they work, the way they read or render in the engine is different. Like you all know that beard are somewhat fine hairs and eyebrows and eyelashes are much finer. So the way the engine should render these specific areas is something that I wanted to control myself, to give a little more attention of thickness to other things than the hair as well. So these are some of the material IDs that went in. Transfer normals is something, let's say, the normals of the hairs are pretty messed up right now. You can see blacks and grays and whites and not. So what normals are, it's a bit difficult to explain it right now. What it does is basically captures the face direction, the way the angle, the camera angle is going to look at the hairs, and it just copies that normals. So I created a spear like a bulge over the head. So it copies the rays that you look at through, and it's going to just take up that space and that angle and place it on the hair cards. And finally is the Vertex Ao. This is again similar to the Ao. It's just that we're doing it on the plane. It just helps in the engine to create that nice distance, nice breakage of depth with shadows and fake lighting. The shader setup is something that's very, very important. This shader setup is something that we took from the Epix gallery. It comes as a digital human. Any of you can just go online, just check it out. It's called digital human. You can just look at the shaders. What we did is we took that shader and modified it further to be more presentable, to be more tweaked to our needs, right? So these are some of the settings that went. These are not very specific, and it changes from character to character. It changes from environment to environment, and also how you want to let the textures read, how thick they are, how thin they are, how layered they are, all these things. But you can see the maps. The alpha goes here. This is the depth map, which is equal to the ID map that we use, the diffuse. There is a dye mask, which helps us to change. Like let's say if there was a blonde hair, I would be able to change the roots to be more darker brown or a champagne white and all these things. So there's a nice variation that you can add through the dye mask, root map, and finally the unique ID map. So once this is done, that's again a real-time thing that you see, and finally we see the results for the hairs are as is. The textures for the skin were also done by Sriram, and we did, so this was for the hairs, but it wasn't like, okay, let's just make the hair good. The head was also something that was very highly tweaked. And we made all the maps, and this is our final result. This is what it looks like. And yeah, you can find this on the ArtStation as well. I have made a tutorial out there as well for you to look at too. So yeah, this is the final result, and thank you guys. Thanks for listening in. Anyway, so you can just fire any questions you have towards me. I'll be more than happy to help you out.
Could you go back to the third slide?
Third slide, okay.
If I recall, I think it's like third or fourth.
All right, let's go.
I'll point it out. Yes, this one.
Yep.
So you initially mentioned that you took the concept.
Yes.
Using the alphas, and you used one plane, and you used XGen to generate the hair. Yeah. Now, the first part of my question is, under what category does the final product come? Is it a type of polygon, or is it type of curve?
So they are tubes, basically. These things are something that's very conserved to the Maya itself. You have to convert it. Let's say you're trying to understand if this is a plane or polygons, right?
Yeah.
But it's not. It's just a tube that the Maya is rendering. You cannot really have it in a form of mesh. It's a guide. It has certain values to it. Well, let's say if I'm adding the hair count. Let's say if I'm adding from 100 to 500. So it's not exactly adding the polygonal things. It's just adding some tubes to it. So if I want to convert it, I have an option to go ahead and convert it into a mesh. But right now, it's not in a mesh form.
So it's exclusive to only Maya. It's nothing that can be exported to a game engine.
You cannot directly export. You have to convert it into a mesh. So imagine if I convert that thing into mesh, it will be easily 5 to 10 millions because it's so dense. If you want to convert it, you can convert it into a mesh.
Okay, so how did you convert the image from tweaked to final? Did you just render it from one?
I just rendered. So what's happening is this is just a perspective angle, but from the front, it looks like that. I used Arnold for that. And there are certain materials that I use, which are AAA shaders. If you look up online, AAA shaders is made by a guy. He has shared this online where you can create certain IDs to it. You can bake the AO maps that I showed later. You can bake the AO maps, you can bake the spec maps, and that's something that is collaborated with the Arnold. So Arnold renders it, and I used AL shaders to get that final result.
Okay, could you go to the next slide?
Okay.
And again, the first image which was there in the previous slide, which I pointed out. So you basically take the render and you go back and replace it with the hand-painted phase. So and you use it again, right?
Not replace it. These are all the different ones that come in. So if you look at the original one, this is the guides that I had roughly painted. This is the kind of shapes that I was looking for. And I went ahead and placed all of them. This is just one example. I did all these things for every single one of them. There are like, I don't know, 10 something, 7 or 8. All of these were separately made. They were not duplicated. So if I rendered a pack, what will happen is you'll get this square map where everything will be rendered in one shot. The final textures that you see over here, this is the rendered thing. This is just the alpha that went in. This all thing is not something that I tweak. This is one render and I get everything.
So you never actually made a hand-painted opacity map?
No. This is all from the
render.
Arnold, yes.
All right. Would you prefer this method, or because there was one more method which I saw on YouTube, which uses just Substance Painter, and it stretches like through the 90 degrees.
Okay.
And it uses clumps in Zbrush, and you just use curve generators.
Are you asking me, do I prefer this method?
No, I mean, this is your method, but you must be knowing of that method as well.
Yes, of course.
So in your personal comparison, what is the main difference between those? Because I use that one.
So what happens is I've been refining this method for quite a few years now, and I'm trying to be very more. So it's not just that I use this. My job is also to train the other artists as well, right? So I need to be very familiar with this. What method you're telling is something that I went through it roughly. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I have a rough idea what it does. The results that you get in that is something I cannot really compare unless I see it myself, right? So I would definitely say this is a little more refined and in controlled way than what I've done.
Yeah, I would agree. The final product of this looks much better.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right. So any other questions?
If you want to make shorter hairs,
right,
it will cost more poly count, right?
It will, yes.
So is it okay to just paint a few things?
It is. It definitely is. It again depends up to you if whether you're doing it for a personal purpose. If you're doing it for personal, hell, go ahead, do like a million or 2 million. Doesn't really matter. If you're doing professionally, yes, you're restricted. Let's say if they're telling 5,000, you have to go back and forth with the client, and they will of course accept the fact that if it's pretty thin and if you're seeing the scalp, you'd rather paint it rather than spending hundreds of triangles. Right?
Okay. And even the stubble wasn't painted as well.
The stubble, for this one, no, nothing was made. Actually, I don't really have the image, but if you go on ArtStation, you'll find a bald Tom Cruise which has no hair at all.
Okay.
So, yeah, no stubble, no hair, nothing fake. Everything, all polygonal alpha cards.
Okay, and just one more thing.
Yeah.
The XGen thing which you generated, right? Were they converted into polygons? And
No, they all
render?
stayed in the Maya. They stay as an XGen file.
Okay.
There's a certain separate file that generates once you create XGen. So they stay as XGen. I do not really need to convert it. You can do that if you want to generate normals, but I did not find that necessary in this case.
Okay, so there's no normal map here.
There is a normal map,
Tangent
but it's
maps.
converted using the X normal, which just takes whatever map you already have and it just converts it. So that would be, so what I take is the Wind Occlusion, mix it with the alpha and the spec or the flat and convert it using the X normal. What X normal does is converts heights to normal. So that's how the normal map was made for this case.
Okay, and just one more thing.
Sure.
Unique ID, how did you like...
we make, this is a flat ID. So every single hair strands that you see has certain ID to it.
Yeah.
We make it little grayscale. We just turn down the saturation from that and we give a contrast pass to it so that the hairs are more popping, right? They have that nice belief to it. There's nice contrast to it. So that's how the engine easily spots that.
So were they selected one by one and then
Not
given
really. That again, like I said, since this is the fast process, the computer understands it how to randomize. There's a value for randomizing it. So if you randomize it, it will automatically give everything a unique ID.
So that was done in Maya as well?
It was in Maya, yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Hi, sir.
Hey.
In the slide that you have shown to where you are optimizing the haircuts, right?
Yeah.
In there you were saying about a problem that you get sliced hair on different angles.
Yes.
Can you explain it once again? I didn't get it.
So what happens is, this is a plane, right? And you are seeing this textures to it. Let's just look at an example where, yeah, fine. This is an angle where all the hairs, the cards are placed like this. They have a flatness to it. A card is only able to show you the render and the thicker parts, right? Just if you're looking at, the camera is facing like this. It's facing from your side to this. You're able to see the hairs. Imagine the camera is being faced from this side to the left. What you'll see is just a plane, right? A plane is a 2D thing, right? It just has length and width. There is no depth to it. It's not a cube, right? So how do you get that volume? The problem with having this flatness is it renders really weirdly in an engine. If the light is getting hit, it will start showing some shininess, which it shouldn't. Let's say if light is getting hit from the front, the back will also shine, which is not really good when you're looking at cinematics or the hairs. So it basically helps you create volume. What I did by intersecting is I told that from every angle that you look at, it will always show you some hairs. Okay. Right? So what that does is basically give you volume. It's a fake way of doing, making sure that there is a lot more hair than actually it is. While on the other hand, it's just two planes intersecting each other.
So it doesn't create any Z fighting issues or anything like that?
It depends again on engine, but nowadays it's so sophisticated, the intersections don't really make up much for that. So it's fine.
Okay, so the haircuts laying straight also can have some intersections?
Some intersections are allowed. It again depends on layer to layer. The more exterior layer you get into, the more compromisable it is. So it's fine.
So as you used XGen and you might have explored Ornatrix also?
Yes, I have.
So what will you prefer using for this process?
XGen.
Do you find XGen?
Hands down, yes.
Okay.
All right, I guess I can call it a wrap then. All right, thank you guys. Thank you so much.